every right to feel scared and threatened in Britain. On Saturday night, 10 people were allegedly stabbed by a knifeman.
53,000 confirmed attacks in a single year. A new knife crime every 10 minutes. Public trust in law enforcement has collapsed by 28%. British streets have become war zones following yet another brutal attack on a young girl by Danko Magic. Officials attempted to downplay it, insisting the victim was a young woman rather than a girl, but the crowds didn't care. Karma stands accused of turning Britain into the machete capital of Europe. By 8:05 p.m., protesters from London to Leeds were demanding the immediate deportation of 600,000 individuals back to Africa and the Middle East. Starmer dismissed the call as absolutely intolerant and impossible. At 8:23 p.m., a massive assault was launched against police cordons. Orders were clear: hold the line. By 8:40, elite platoons were forced to retreat after taking volleys of fireworks directly to their faces. This was no holiday celebration, it was total chaos. Starmer issued a statement claiming murder rates were down 6% and knife murders down 1%. The remark only fueled anger. Opposition leader Nigel Farage fired back, pointing out that over 70% of crime remains in the shadows, directly implicating the involvement of undocumented arrivals. Why? Because those arriving on small boats aren't in police databases and hold no official documents.
For taking part in the procession is committing an offence.
Within just 2 hours, 6 new police vans were deployed, yet 3 were quickly surrounded and destroyed. By 9:05 p.m., groups of masked men clashed with officers. The protests had evolved beyond calls for action. The streets were now in the hands of the rioters. Glass bottles were hurled at mounted units, leaving 78 people hospitalized on both sides. Multiple media outlets labeled these actions as the work of extremists. Yet, Keir Starmer reassured European leaders, saying, "Britain is fully under control. The radicals have almost zero support." At the London protest, placards highlighted alarming statistics: a 320% rise in machete attacks since 2000, with critics warning that 80% of women and children could be at risk. That same night, 7 hotels mysteriously went up in flames. Police rushed to erect additional barricades to protect migration centers. By that point, 6-9 arrests had been made, but the worst was yet to come. Teenage knife homicides had surged by 240% compared to 2015, with 150 attacks reported inside schools. Kitchen cleavers and machetes were being seized from classrooms. In response, Starmer introduced kindness lessons to influence students' behavior, sidestepping the root of the problem. Meanwhile, 3 boats were spotted arriving from the Channel. Nigel Farage declared that Britain had one last chance: repeal the ban on pepper spray, at least for women, and enact the Castle Doctrine, allowing homeowners to defend their property. Within 3 hours, 2.3 million comments flooded in, demanding the right to self-defense, mirroring the approach in the United States. In Britain, victims rely solely on the police, who often arrive too late. What followed was branded by Keir Starmer as a blatant violation of human rights. Farage called for the deportation of over 600,000 new arrivals back to the Middle East and Africa, and vowed to establish militarized units modeled after U.S. ICE. Donald Trump even hinted at offering specialist assistance to restore safety. Starmer, however, opted for a different approach. He announced a law banning the sale of zombie knives, but gangs simply bought them in advance and renamed them katanas to bypass legislation, a failed strategy. Meanwhile, Nigel Farage gained 2.3% in voter support within just 4 hours. Keir Starmer had built his political reputation as the nation's top prosecutor, promising to restore order. Instead, he delivered the disastrous SDS-40 scheme. Britain's prison system operates at over 99% capacity. Cells are full, guards are overwhelmed, yet instead of expanding capacity or securing borders, Starmer opened the gates. While the government framed it as a logistical necessity, the public saw it as surrender. Under SDS-40, dangerous offenders are released after serving only 40% of their sentences, creating a revolving door that mocks justice. In 1 year alone, 40,000 convicts were back on the streets. Criminals' new sentences were mere suggestions. Critics argued that Starmer had effectively decriminalized serious offenses. The opposition erupted. Nigel Farage slammed the scheme as a betrayal of law-abiding families, proposing a simple solution: deport over 10,000 foreign nationals currently clogging British jail. This would free thousands of cells, save taxpayers millions, and make space to handle machete gangs terrorizing London. Starmer refused. Foreign criminals remained housed, while British criminals roamed free, a twisted set of priorities. Keir Starmer, once the tough prosecutor, became the jailer who lost the keys. Victims lived in fear, watching abusers return to the streets months after sentencing. Police officers were demoralized, risking their lives only to see offenders released by bureaucratic mandate. Nearly 40,000 potential repeat offenders circulated among the general population. The deterrent was gone. Carry a zombie knife? No consequences. Assault a pensioner? Prisons are full. Starmer had signaled to the criminal underworld that Britain was open for business. This anarchy is no accident. Critics had warned that early releases would result in bloodshed, yet the government pressed forward. Farage's warnings rang true. In the US, a homeowner can defend their castle. In Starmer's Britain, victims wait for police intervention while facing threats, knowing self-defense could land them in court. The mobs burning cars tonight are fueled by this betrayal, witnessing a justice system that punishes grandmothers for Facebook posts, yet grants machete-wielding thugs early release. Police retreat not due to being outgunned, but because the law paralyzes effective action. The social contract is shredded. When the government confiscates means of defense and refuses protection, the streets inevitably erupt. Whitehall watches hotels burn while debating hate speech laws, oblivious to the public's realization they are on their own. The ban on pepper spray, refusal to deport foreign criminals, and the SDS-40 scheme are not isolated issues. They are the ingredients of a suicide note for a Western democracy. Starmer promised to crush gangs. Instead, he shattered public faith in law itself. Britain remains the only developed nation where leaders believe banning a specific knife handle will prevent massacres. Tonight's inferno was predicted. Reports warned that banning zombie knives would push gangs toward larger blades. Online black markets were unregulated. Schools were already seizing massive knives, and disarming citizens would leave them defenseless. Every warning was ignored. The Prime Minister personally rejected the Castle Doctrine, citing proportionate response principles. Meanwhile, hotels burned, migration centers were barricaded, and police vans were overturned by mobs who knew the state had folded. A government that confiscates pepper spray from women becomes a government that enables their attackers. Under Starmer's tenure, machete attacks have tripled, and the loophole allowing ninja swords was immediately exploited. Police lost control of entire postcodes, while Whitehall became paralyzed by its own ideological rigidity. Even tonight, as cities descended into open revolt, senior officials were more concerned with condemning Nigel Farage's rhetoric than preventing fireworks being launched at police horses. This is how a state loses its monopoly on violence, not in a single dramatic collapse, but through thousands of confiscated sprays, ignored warnings, and bureaucratic paralysis. Whitehall can deny it, Starmer can spin it, but the public saw the truth in the flames tonight. Britain is governed by leaders who would prosecute a homeowner defending themselves while refusing to deport a foreign criminal who broke in. If the rioters had demanded lower taxes, the response would have been swift. Yet because the violence erupted from a public pushed to the breaking point by unchecked knife crime, Whitehall's instinct was not to solve the problem, but to silence complaints. This is the moment a government stops serving its people and begins serving its ideology. Tonight was not just a riot, it was a reckoning. Britain's streets no longer belong to law-abiding citizens who pay their bills and respect the rules. They now belong to armed gangs the government refuses to confront. What terrified Britain tonight was not the sound of breaking glass, but the silence of a prime minister with no solution. Whitehall hid, the Metropolitan Police retreated, and Starmer's government once again prioritized the appearance of virtue over the reality of safety. The message was unmistakable. If you face a machete, you are on your own. The international reputation of the United Kingdom has entered a steep decline. Within the NHS, the cost of political denial is measured in critical care beds. Trauma surgeons are now treating injuries once restricted to active combat zones, severed limbs, complex eviscerations, and permanent nerve damage inflicted by military-grade weapons. Taxpayers are funding a healthcare system overwhelmed by the casualties of a turf war the government refuses to acknowledge. Yet the nightly news presents a different picture. National broadcasters systematically omit suspect descriptions in knife attacks, using neutral terms like youths to obscure demographic patterns and refusing to show seized weapons. It is a curated silence, designed to manage public anxiety rather than inform it. On the ground, the high street is adapting to a wartime reality. Supermarket security guards now wear stab-proof vests as standard uniform. Independent shopkeepers close before sunset to avoid evening gangs. International capital is quietly leaving London, viewing the state's inability to guarantee safety as a structural economic risk. Wealth is mobile and migrating to jurisdictions where employees can walk to work without fear. The social fabric is tearing along clear fault lines. In Birmingham and Leeds, distinct communities have begun organizing their own street patrols, policing their neighborhoods without state oversight. The constabulary has tacitly ceded control of these postcodes to avoid conflict. Britain is witnessing a de facto balkanization of urban centers, a patchwork of territories managed by local power brokers, no longer a unified nation under one law. Starmer's response? Kindness workshops in secondary schools, a policy utterly detached from the threat level. Parents are no longer just buying pencil cases, they are purchasing bulletproof backpack inserts on Amazon. Extreme violence has become normalized at the school gates. As the state retreats, dangerous alternatives fill the vacuum. Black market demand for illegal defensive sprays has skyrocketed, particularly among women, while neighborhood groups coordinate defense strategies via encrypted messaging apps. When government abdicates its duty to protect, vigilantism inevitably rises. This is not a temporary spike in crime. It represents a fundamental shift in the kingdom's operations. Authorities believe they can manage decline with silence and statistics. They are miscalculating public mood. This is not mere civil dissatisfaction. It is a realization that the social contract has dissolved. The era of relying on the police is ending. The era of self-preservation has begun. A new operational protocol shapes crime reporting in the United Kingdom. When violent incidents occur, law enforcement often prioritizes narrative management over transparency. Press statements are scrubbed of sensitive descriptors. A suspect's demographic or religious background may be omitted. Names withheld for days. Photographs blocked. Immigration status classified as irrelevant. Officials justify this as a measure to prevent community friction and avoid accusations of Islamophobia. Critics, however, argue it serves a political purpose, masking the true nature of the violence. The public is left interpreting vague euphemisms like local man or youths instead of receiving hard facts. Senior officers privately acknowledge immense pressure to avoid headlines that might spark backlash against minority groups, allowing fear of bias to override the duty of full disclosure. Nigel Farage has positioned himself as the primary challenger to this institutional silence. He describes the withholding of suspect information as a deliberate state cover-up of migration failures. Farage demands a granular breakdown of violent crime statistics by nationality and visa category, a dataset the Home Office has historically resisted publishing. He argues that voters cannot make informed decisions if the scale of the problem is obscured. Farage highlights disparities in reporting. When suspects are native-born, identities and histories are rarely withheld. When suspects are recent arrivals or asylum seekers, information flow stops. He contends this double standard is eroding trust between police and public, framing transparency not as prejudice, but as a matter of national safety. The government dismisses these demands as populist and dangerous. Ministers accuse Farage of exploiting individual tragedies to sow division and scapegoat communities, maintaining that crime is an individual choice, not a cultural import. Yet the persistent refusal to release data suggests a government terrified of the numbers. By suppressing facts, authorities create a vacuum now filled with speculation and rumor.